Hi, I'm Dr. Paul Dykman and I'm an outcomes and evaluation expert. What I'm talking about here is how to do outcomes-focused contracting using a visual approach. And this is a new way of dealing with some difficult problems which are emerging in thinking about contracting of programs and policies in the health and social areas. We've all got a problem around outcomes-focused contracting, and outcomes-focused contracting is any kind of contracting which is attempting to lift people up from the output level of the program to thinking about higher level outcomes. And the question is, a number of people are thinking about this these days, how can we sensibly contract with that sort of philosophy and that sort of approach? Because the problem is all about what we hold the program to account for. It's easy in a situation where it's easy to prove that a program changed high-level outcomes because we just simply hold that program to account for those high-level outcomes. But it's much more difficult in those situations where a number of factors influence high-level outcomes because we can't just hold one program to account for them. And this is particularly relevant in modern programs where there are multiple social factors influencing what happens. We're wanting people to collaborate, a number of programs collaborate on achieving the same high-level outcomes. How do we deal with this question of holding them to account above the outputs level, and outputs are the goods and services that a particular program produces? How can we get them to focus on high-level outcomes but also have some way of holding them to account in an appropriate way? I want to talk about a new visual way of doing this, which has a lot of promise to really make the discussions around this a lot more coherent. And I'm going to show you an example here using DoView outcomes and evaluation software of how we can work around this issue with a visual model. So I'm moving here to a model within DoView, and this is of a smoking reduction campaign, and we've got part of the model here which we're looking at the moment. As you can see, it starts off with focus groups on a media campaign, an activity of the program, and then it moves up to the media campaign designed, and then all the way up to the top of the model, which is all about the high-level outcome of reducing smoking. Now, we have here on the model, what I've done is I've put in a number of indicators that we have which measure various aspects of the model, and we're going to be talking about what we should and shouldn't contract the program for in terms of these indicators. Let's start at the bottom, and we can imagine that this could be a discussion. We could be having this discussion between the funder and the provider around this visual model. And in DoView, because of the way it's been designed to data project the model onto a screen, so a group can work with a model like this when they're having a funding discussion. First up, it makes sense to hold the program accountable for focus groups on media campaign, and it makes sense to have them contracted for that. So we've put the word contracted here in next to focus groups held, that indicator. In regard to the media campaign being designed, again, it makes sense to contract the program for the plan developed and successfully peer reviewed. It also makes sense for us to contract them for actually holding and running the media campaign. And then in regard to campaign reach, it again probably makes sense almost certainly to hold them to account for campaign reach, as we're doing there, and we're putting the word contracted next to that, and for the campaign message recall and recognition amongst those who've seen it, we're also contracting them for that. However, if we move right up the top of the model to smoking rates here, does it make sense to contract the program for smoking rates? And the answer may well be no, because as the program would point out, and you can see I'm clicking here on reduce smoking, there's actually a number of factors which influence this. These include the price of cigarettes, the attitudes and knowledge about smoking, which will be impacted by the program, but also tobacco company advertising, for instance. So the program would argue that it does not really make sense to hold them contractually accountable for the high level perhaps of reducing smoking and because of these different factors which are influencing it. So one approach is just to, well, not measure it and not worry about that high level, but within the approach I suggest, we do actually get the program to focus on this. We get them to measure it. but we don't hold them to account for it. And you can see that here I'm writing the word measured, meaning that we'll get the program to measure smoking rates. And obviously if these aren't tracking in the way we'd like, then we need to reconsider the strategies we're using. But we're all agreed, the funder and the provider, that we're not going to hold the program to account for these because there are a number of other factors which influence it. There'd be perhaps an interesting discussion of whether the program should be held to account for knowledge and attitude change, which I won't go into here. But once we've got this visual environment to work within, you can see how the funder and provider could have such a discussion. When they've finished that discussion, they can create a PDF and attach that to the back, as some people are doing at the moment with DV files, to the back of the contract, and that clearly indicates what the program will be contracted for and what it will be measuring. They could actually produce a web page model also, which clearly documents, and DV produces that, which clearly documents what the program is and is not being contracted for. What I've talked about here is the way in which we can use a new visual approach to thinking through this difficult issue of what level we should hold a program to account for. And we've done that by suggesting that all the discussions take place against the visual model, and that clearly indicates what the program should be contracted for and what the program should just measure and track, but not necessarily be contracted for changing. This is a very much outcomes-focused approach to contracting, rather than the old type of contracting where programs may have just been accountable for lower level outputs, and we never expected them to think at this higher level of the way in which the logic of the program should be working to achieve high level outcomes. Thank you very much.